I think that's where like the market is shifting. If you're a tech leader, if you're a sales leader in the space, like you have to look at this next, call it a level, if you will, of like playing the game, because you can't just have really good sellers. You can't just have, really good BDRs and create more, because the more is not the answer. Better actually is. And if you take that concept, then isn't CS a function of sales at some point?
My name's Mike Lander, and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations, and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders, and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. Barrett, fantastic to have you on Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast. I've been really, really looking forward to this because we've been messaging for quite a while now, which I love. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I do enjoy it as well. I'm stoked to have this conversation live. This will be fun.
Perfect. So I'm not going to introduce you. You're going to introduce you. So basically, who are you? What do you do? Bit about your background, and then something unusual about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. So I'm Barrett King. I'm the Senior Director of Revenue at New Breed, HubSpot's top partner in the ecosystem. And actually myself, ex-HubSpot, I was there for almost 9 years.
Wow.
I've been at this for, I think 15 years now, something like that, around B2B tech sales and whatnot. But fun fact, I graduated at a time when the market wasn't doing very well. So despite having a design degree that I've literally almost never used, I went into restaurants after college for a period of time and opened at what was at the time one of Boston's top restaurants, and had a blast doing that for a couple of years. Yeah. And then found my way into tech, found my way out of tech into bigger tech. So startup land into, at the time, HubSpot, which is about 300 employees when I joined. And then after that, which has been about a year ago now, I've been at New Breed, which again is HubSpot's top partner. And so my journey is kind of atypical in that sense, but a fun one to say the least.
Very good. Excellent. So let's get into the kind of questions that we just talked about.
Sure.
So in fact, no, before we do the questions, I have another question for you, which is unprepared, which I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, we were looking before. HubSpot's valuation today, public data, is what, 24 billion?
Yeah, 24. I think we Googled 24.24, I think is what the internet told us, which is
billion
pretty high. Billion. Yeah. They just did about $2 billion in revenue last year.
That's just remarkable.
Yeah, it's wild.
And you were there kind of in the earlier days.
Yep.
Just fascinated by how did they kind of scale in the early stages? How do you get as a SaaS tech kind of CRM platform? How do you scale that thing? What happened?
I think it was, if you look back at it, so I joined around 350 employees, somewhere in that ballpark, and I stayed till about 8,000. Actually, it was just over 8,000 when I left. Yeah. HubSpot did some things really well, some things obviously that they could have done differently. You always learn as you go.
Sure.
Early on, they listened to the market. I think what tech was not doing well at the time, to go negative specifically, was they were building, in particular the companies that were up and coming then, they were building products and services that were specific to what they themselves wanted to envision, right? A CTO would say, I want to go solve this problem, and they would go solve it. HubSpot was really good at listening to customer problems, specifically on the front end, and saying, I joined when the marketing product was doing quite well. They were starting to think about this whole sales tool thing. It became Sales Hub, which became the CRM. But in the beginning days, it was called Sidekick. And all it did was track email opens and clicks, which at the time was just like fascinating. And it was because customers were saying, the marketing stuff is great, right? The insight there is really valuable because they had a marketing email engine. But we've got, scores of salespeople that are using this really antiquated tool, aka Gmail or Outlook, right? That wasn't providing any data, any insight. It was just a tool that sent messages.
Yeah.
And HubSpot capitalized on that with a little widget. I have friends who were on that team. They sat across from me when I first started, that their entire job was to reach out to customers and say, we'll give you this application for free. We'll show you how to use it. And so first was listening to the market. Second was supporting customers very early on. So Mark Roberge, the original CRO at HubSpot, used to always say, do unscalable shit early on. Right. Because that's when your chance is to do so. And I think, providing a 15 or 30 minute consultation for a free customer was brilliant, right? Getting good product market adoption and fit from your customers and getting feedback and being able to pivot the platform based on that. So first was obviously, again, listening to the market and building for it. Second was engaging those customers regardless of their spend and whatnot. And the third piece that made them uniquely positioned was, and I've talked about this before, and I'll probably talk about it for the rest of my professional career, but it was how they went to market with partnerships. At its core, HubSpot was brilliant. They observed their most successful customers are working with marketing agencies. They went to those agencies and said, what are you doing? Learned about it. And then their partner program was, we'll help you to package, price, and sell our software with your services to deliver additive value to your customers. So partner won, right? Agency won because they got their services delivered faster, better ROI, and in some ways cheaper. Customer won because they got better software. HubSpot won because they got the resell out of it and a stickier customer. And then I would add anecdotally on top of all of that, inbound marketing. Like through and through, what HubSpot did was, people look at it as like this very disruptive concept. Content marketing was early. Digital marketing was so early.
Yeah.
I remember literally calling customers back and saying, well, advertising on billboards doesn't work anymore. Radio advertising doesn't work anymore. And they'd be like, well, yeah, I know, I'm seeing that. What do I do? And we'd say, well, it's inbound marketing. What is that? Right. Well, it's digital marketing. You create content, answer your customers' questions, and they'll come to you for more advice, ultimately converting and becoming, your customer. And I think that in its own was going to make HubSpot successful, but then layering in thousands of marketing agencies around the globe who are really good at marketing to also do the thing that you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
There's like an economy of scale thing that just absolutely blew up overnight. And they did really well because of it.
Wow. Amazing. Just, amazing. And we talked before about the importance of distribution when you have a product. Whether it's a tech product, whether it's a service that you've wrapped into a product. Once you've got a product, then the scaling factor often is, well, you need distribution partners because that's how you're going to scale. Because you can't sell your way. You can, but it's very slow into every single customer. Yeah. Whereas if you've got like a channel that's got more customers, you're like, great, do that.
I think you have to, let me add one more dimension because you're right. That's the first dimension of scalability and growth. I think about it as you got to first build your product market fit and sort of foundation of your teams. You got to figure out how to sell and how to service, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And then you got to think about partner market fit, which is what do we need in terms of where our partners fit into our ideology and how we think about customer. And because of that, it's important to think about partners not exclusively in the framework, the guardrails of they will sell our software or whatnot, but how will they improve our customer value, which for HubSpot and for Salesforce and Amazon and the other bigs was always sell and service. And then at some point, Salesforce got big enough, they said, it's not really about selling, it's just about servicing. And their ecosystem sort of flopped in the other direction. Amazon's moving in that motion right now. HubSpot's still sort of stuck in the early 2000s model, and that's working for them.
Just unpack that. When you say sell and service, just unpack that. What do you mean?
So there's if you think about the different dimensions of partner and the different dimensions of the way that you can go to market with another organization, there's the distributor, reseller, who all they do is take your software or whatever and they sell it at scale. Like they become your, as the word implies, your distribution engine, right?
It's a sales channel.
Totally sales oriented. Some of them will actually service, like they might become your customer service arm or your CS arm to some extent. Depends on the industry and part of the world. In like Japan, you see that quite a bit. They have a tiered distribution model in country. It's fascinating. You see that in India. You see it less in Europe because Europe is more Americanized in the way that they think about channel. But then you've got VAR, which is value-added reseller. They sell and service on top of that. And if you look at the businesses that have scaled really well in tech, they've figured out the VAR motion really well, particularly because in an ideal state, that partner then helps you source and acquire a new business. Ideally good fit and whatnot, all the boxes you want them to check. And then they sell your software, they onboard your customer, they service that customer, and they increase the stickiness and theoretically cross and upsell of that customer as well. Right. That's the perfect storm of go-to-market lift that everybody aspires to have. And I think when you look at, because I've seen it, the best ecosystems are the ones that nailed that motion and then they iterate on it. The ones that stall out are the ones that don't. So they, I don't know how true this is, but I have this working theory right now. I've had this come up a few times recently, which is if you look at the early to mid 2000s, partners were 66% net new growth, 33% retention and expansion. Right. I think that model's flipped on its head now. I think in the current selling environment, it's 66% or more retention and expansion, CSR, if you will, right? And then 33, if you will, percent net new growth. Because especially in the software space, the tech companies and software companies that are doing well have figured out how to retain and expand their customers.
Yeah.
Happy customers, right? Healthy business. And partnerships should drive that too.
I mean, I've got this mantra with a guy that I work with. I've known him for about 7 or 8 years. We work together, and it's his business. I chair it. But we're very much partners. And one thing that me and Kevin talk about a lot is there's basically 3 levels in. They run an SEO business, a really successful e-commerce based SEO business. And we said, right, okay, back to fundamentals. First thing is quality. Deliver high quality outcomes and outputs for your clients. Focus on that. Just deliver brilliant outcomes. And then off the back of that, well, we'll retain them because we're doing such a great job and delivering such a great ROI that they want to stay with us. So that's number 2. And then when that happens, well, then we'll win awards and they'll talk to other clients and then we'll grow. And that is at the core of a growth strategy that's worked incredibly well.
Yeah. That's the flywheel that HubSpot tried to brand years back, right? They call it flywheel. It was this whole idea of like, could you acquire good customers, make them really happy, deliver good value, and because of that, the theory was that they would create, momentum in your business because they would tell other people and they would help you generate net new. It evolved to be ecosystem-based methodology and the concept of, right, like your surround sound. If you've got people singing your praises and they're really happy about what you do, then you're going to have an amplification of your opportunity growth.
Yes.
If you don't, and the opposite is true, then it's a totally different story. And that's fair. I think you're going to see tech lean heavier and heavier into that. Jay McBain talked about this, and he has for a couple of years. He's head analyst at Canalys. They do big partner ecosystem analysis and really smart guy. But he keeps calling it the decade of ecosystem. Like not partnerships. Partnerships is single dimension. And not VAR, not resell, but ecosystem in terms of developing emotion around your organization. It's about network. It's about, certainly reputation. It's about accelerated value beyond your 4 walls. And it matters.
Exactly. And I mean, in a very small way, because it's just me. If you look at where I track my revenue carefully about where it came from. So I keep a record of the deal source as any good consultant and sales professional should. And it's obvious. It's blindingly obvious. It's like 70 to 80% in every year is through my network. Yep. It's through referrals, people that know me and refer me on, or it's through relationships I've built over many, many years and they move job and something comes up and they want to work with me. Or it's some kind of connection they've got with someone else and they kind of have a conversation. They invite me to a panel. I sit on a panel and then someone in the audience goes, that's really interesting. Can I talk to you afterwards? That's, for me, become more than, you talk about content marketing, really interesting. More than written content, that to me has become one of the cornerstones of my kind of growth, has podcasting.
But it has to, because you're talking about the ability to go and do more than just sell through a problem. Like you used to be able to just acquire more customers and you didn't worry about those things like churn or retention or happiness index and whatnot, right? And I think what you saw, not to bring up this depressing topic, but through the pandemic and through the whole experience that the planet had, was that decision-making no longer had to be regional or even time zone specific, because so many companies got really good at working through that problem, remote and flexible workspaces and whatnot. That when you look at the big picture in terms of how folks make decisions now, they were bombarded, and we are bombarded by ads and emails and content and crap, right? And that is sort of critical mass, if you will, is going to get worse with AI and the reach that creates, right? So if you assume that that's the case, then where do I get my validation? Where do I get my next sell confirmation? And it's going to come from your customers and the people that you've delivered value to, because they can vouch for the fact that you have done that and done that well. Yeah. I mean, that's where
with them.
Yeah. And I think that's where like the market is shifting. If you're a tech leader, if you're a sales leader in the space, like you have to look at this next, I don't know what it is. You call it a level, if you will, of like the playing the game, because you can't just have really good sellers. You can't just have really good BDRs and create more, because the more is not the answer. Better actually is. And if you take that concept, then isn't CS a function of sales at some point? Probably.
Aha. So interesting. So slightly divergent topic, but we will get to the questions at some point, maybe, possibly. Who knows?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. So on that thread, just going down a little small rabbit warren. In order to get customers to recommend you to other prospects and customers, my experience is you've got to be at a certain level in the organization to enable that to happen. It's unlikely that a marketing manager is going to get another marketing manager to kind of become a prospect and a potential client, because broadly that they're not senior enough. They often don't have enough budget.
Correct.
And influence.
They're your social proof. They're not your like your reference. They're social proof. Yeah,
exactly right. So that means that as a service provider, you have to be engaging at the C-suite in order to get people that, when you've built a trusting relationship with them, when they do speak about you to others, other C-suite people, they'll go, "We've got that problem. We've got it 10 times bigger, and then I've got a budget, and I can solve that problem with a third party. Who do I talk to?" And they say, "Go and talk to Barrett."
Yep.
But that's very different in terms of your ability to build those senior relationships, because it relies upon the old trusted advisor model, is my hypothesis. What are your thoughts?
I think it does. I mean, that is table stakes right now. And I don't think anyone's doing it exceptionally well that I've interacted with. Right. Even in the intimate conversations I have with customers on a daily basis, they say, well, how do we level up ourselves, right? Because right. I don't think that I almost want to say like the customer dynamic hasn't necessarily caught up to the way that the market requires it to operate, in the sense that, services businesses are problem solvers, right? Like we're value correct. Adds. We're doing things that are specific to a business.
Yep.
But it tends to be, to your point, economy of scale problem, but like at the director and the VP level, not the C-suite level for most of the time. So you got to get really good at the QBR. You get it really good at executive multi-threading and cross-selling, which is not what your services team members are going to do. They're not incentivized to, and you don't want them to.
No,
your sales team members shouldn't be. It's an executive problem.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, if you're a revenue leader at an organization right now, you should be looking at your accounts, not key accounts, all of your accounts, and saying, what level are we flying at, operating at in those organizations, and how do we level it up? And to your point, maybe it's an ROI conversation, or maybe it's a
industry trends conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a QBR, but you bring in data from other customers and you anonymize it, but you show what others in the industry are doing. Like it's got to be a value add about what that level cares about. There's actually made me think of this thing. So I ran sales training at HubSpot for a couple of years, and we had a global problem, which was each of the different regions that we were hiring into. And actually, this is important context. Fun fact: the 2 years that I ran it, almost, or just about 2 years, we hired almost 2,000 employees, so about 1,000 employees a year. Yeah. Not all of them stuck around, but it was an interesting throughput to experience. And one of the unique challenges was that during that timeline, we opened our Japan office, and we had Sydney, we did Tokyo, we did Singapore, I believe, as well. So we had our APAC markets opening up.
Yeah.
And translating training materials, everyone sort of looked at it as like, is it a language challenge? It's actually context, because culturally, that region had a different lens on the problem, right? Versus like in Europe, when we were training in Europe, we had a different lens on the problem.
Yeah.
And so what I learned and what I anchored in, and why this example is relevant, is it's about the lens of interpretation on the problem specifically, to the point where I built in a part of the onboarding training, a specific slide that had a woman with a giant magnifying glass leaning into the camera. It was a picture. They sort of like make your eye look very big, and people would kind of giggle. And we'd spend like 10 minutes being like, well, what do you see here? What do you experience here? And everyone had a different answer. It was constantly different answers. But what I was looking for was that it was her lens of interpretation.
Yeah.
And so if you think about selling today and servicing today, we need to get better at, and the best companies are working on this problem, thinking about our stakeholders as human beings, not a like person in an equation, right? A part of a problem.
Or a persona. Yes.
A persona. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Your ICP, right?
My ICP.
And taking it through their lens. Like if we're, we're implementing a really good demand gen campaign for X company, and we expect it to drive 1,000 new leads next quarter. Why does that matter? What does that do for the company? Is that 10%? Is that 1,000% increase? How does it impact top and bottom line revenue? Is it part of their strategic initiatives? And thinking about how you level yourself up beyond that, that's one of the things that I'm seeing a trend with right now.
Interesting. So, a couple of questions beyond what we've just talked about, which is fascinating. So how has lead gen changed for B2B service / tech companies in the last kind of 5 years? And what do you think commercial leaders should be doing differently? And you've kind of started to talk about that now. So just expand a bit on that.
I mean, I think if you look at it holistically and very specifically in the space, it's just noisier. Like there are more people trying to grab these companies and the individuals' attentions. And so you have to be much more specific. And so some folks would say, well, you got to do targeted outreach and you got to craft your message better. And I kind of call bullshit on that a little bit. I just feel like it's an easy answer to a hard problem. I would go a layer deeper and say, at the risk of maybe overextending my own self here, like every individual in your company that's customer facing should have a brand. I think honestly, if you look at the best companies, it's full of individuals that are owning their social presence and owning their email presence and just owning their brand in general.
Yep.
I'm doing it right now for those that can't see me. I have a black t-shirt on. I have tattoos. I have a shaved head. Like I know I look a certain way. I'm very aware of it.
Right.
I'm aware of the persona that I bring in terms of having B2B background and having tech background and having partnerships as a core part of that. And so I own that and I learn about it and I study about it and I find it interesting, but I'm aware of my persona. I'm proud of it. Exactly. And I think that that's becoming more relevant than ever, that a salesperson can't just sell shit. Like you can't just show up and be like, you're going to buy some stuff because I know how to run a GPCT conversation. I'm really good at Medic or whatever. Like that doesn't actually get you to the outcome you're looking for. You need to be more intentional around qualifying your leads. So your SDR, BDR team needs to be hyper-focused and understanding of not just personas and not just positioning statements, but they need to be students of the problem.
Yep.
And then you look at your sales team and you say, well, they have to be the physicians that actually solve that problem, not just order takers that provide a document someone can sign and close a deal, but really educated in the problems that you help solve or the opportunities you help maximize. So that's the thing I would offer is like the volume will go up and down, the noise will go up and down. Like that's sort of the trend and that's going to be the case. I think you need to be better educators. You need to be more consultative. I hate even saying that word on record here, but I think you do.
Yep.
And more specifically, you need to be intentional around the way that you go to market and the way that your brand flows through your frontline employees. Because that to me is where people are seeing the biggest lift. When I talk to my friends and colleagues that are CROs and heads of sales and such, they all talk about their team members owning their brand.
So let's just dig into that a little bit as well. So where was my kind of thinking going around that? Yeah, so about that kind of personal brand, it's quite hard sometimes to separate you, Barrett, as a personal brand from the company you work in as a brand. So you've got to have this kind of clever thing of you work for a company, you're your own brand, but you're part of a bigger brand. So I think that's one dynamic that goes on. And the second thing I wanted to just mention, so again, you can dig into this a bit more, is I got to know a guy called Blair Enns pretty well, who's a Canadian guy, really brilliant guy. I don't know if you've read his book, but he's written some really fascinating books. But he talks about this physician thing. He works in the marketing agency world and says, it's ludicrous that any company would go into an organization, prescribe a solution without diagnosing. It makes no sense. You would be mad. Oh, my leg hurts. Oh, I'll chop it off. No, I've got the wrong size shoes on. And it's an old story, but it still rings true today, which is the ability to diagnose. So that I was taught discovery calls donkeys years ago, and I still use it today. Discovery is a key part of the sales cycle, and you can't script it. You have to understand the main problem that our client's facing.
It's that right there. You got to understand the problem. Just not to interrupt you, but if you're in America, definitely. By the way, if you're in America, we would just prescribe you pain pills. We wouldn't even cut off your leg. We would just give you pain pills and say, well, good luck. No, I think if you look at the bigger picture, it is understanding the problem. How do you separate yourself was your first question.
Yes.
And I think you have to own the thing that your company is really good at. Now, to be clear, like not everyone's going to do this, but your top 10 or 20% is where you want to see this happen.
Yep.
And those individuals are going to, like, I drank the HubSpot Kool-Aid. Man, I was an advocate for that brand. Like I would live and die for it. I worked hard and I cared. And, HubSpot did a great job building culture, but I believed in the mission.
Yeah.
HubSpot fundamentally changes people's lives. I had this woman who was leading one of our trainings in the second day I think I was there. Maybe it was the afternoon of the first day. And I was in the front row because I was an overachiever. And she walked up and she slammed her fist down on the desk. I won't say her name on record in case she doesn't want this out loud.
Yep.
She's a wonderful person. She slammed her fist down and she said, HubSpot fundamentally changes people's lives in front of the whole class. And I remember just being like, I'm in. Like, yes, whatever that is, yes. I drank all the Kool-Aid the next 5-6 years. And I believed that we were changing people's lives because our software was that much more effective and efficient and helped them be better at what they were doing. And I think because of that, I was able to take the brand that was HubSpot and amplify it through my own voice into social media. And it was in my last 2 years that I went from, 4,500 connections on LinkedIn to 12,500.
Right.
So I started talking about that a lot more because I really cared about what that was. But I found a niche in partnerships and how I can help to cultivate a community of partnerships using my experience and knowledge that I gained at HubSpot. And so
brilliant.
I think you have to be intentional around providing really good opportunities for your employees that lean in and trying to pull more folks in to lean in around what we do, how we solve the problem, not just positioning statements, not just, objection handling, but really deeply understanding customer value. Maybe you do a shadow program where your sales team shadows your CS team members for a week. There's all these different ways to go about it, but help them deeply understand it and then provide avenues for them to amplify that voice, which HubSpot did well with, they used to call it lazy tweets. The marketing team would put out 5 or 6 messages a week and be like, hey, here's some stuff you can put on social. And it taught some folks how to do it. Even the startup I was at before, we used to work myself and we didn't have a marketer, it was me. Myself and my CEO would talk about what we were going to talk about on social and then we'd go put it out there.
Yeah.
And so I think, community is the other piece of this. So when you think about what you're trying to cultivate here, it's a place where people feel good about putting themselves out there. Social media is about putting yourself out there. And if you bring others that are doing that together, it creates a space to do that for scale.
Yep.
That's where you start to see that brand separation and definition take place. And you find your own sort of voice in that.
Brilliant. Very good indeed. Excellent. So let's move on to the other question that we had, because I'm very conscious of your time.
Yeah, you're great.
So how do you solve the sales conversion rate problem? So for example, tactics or strategies that you'd advise for someone with kind of conversion rates below 25%. Now, what I want to just talk about together first of all is when we say conversion rates, to your point earlier on, what assumptions are you making about conversion rates? So for me, conversion rate is I have MQLs, inbounds, marketing kind of qualified leads. They're not sales leads. Then sales pick them up and they kick them around a bit. And then they have sales qualified leads. But an SQL isn't actually a deal we're going to work on potentially. Because an SQL to me is, it looks interesting, but I haven't done the sales qualification bit yet. I haven't got my board to sign into it, or whatever it might be. So my view of conversion rate is from win-loss, win, through back up to we are absolutely convinced we have a chance of winning this, rather than sales pipeline's a bit weak. We thought we'd qualify it in because it'll fill up the hopper. What's your view of kind of, first of all, what does conversion rate really mean? How do you measure it? And then how do you improve it?
I think you're spot on with the way you're describing it. I look at conversion rate in layers. It's not one inflection point. So it's like traffic to lead to customer is kind of the bigger picture. Let's go a layer deeper.
It's whatever it might be.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I used to love when customers would be like, can you help me? And I'd be like, sure. And what do you want help with? And we want to grow. I'm like, oh, great word. Love that you Googled it. But what are you actually talking about here? Yeah. What does growth mean to you? Right?
Exactly.
And they'd be like, well, we need more leads. And I'm like, well, how many leads you got right now? 80,000 a month. I'm like, is that good? Is that a good thing? And they're like, well, we used to have 20,000. Now we have 80. And I'd be like, oh shit, that feels pretty good. That's a pretty good, what are we doing? And you start to realize it's a lead quality problem that folks are not putting out the right content, right? So to answer your question around conversion rates, I think about it as relative to industry, market size and cap, TAM type of product. There's a bunch of variables, but generally speaking, it is the person that's never heard of you all the way through to the person who signs up as a customer and repeats that business. That's the sort of conversion journey.
Yes.
I do think the first question you should ask yourself as a leader right now is, am I a student of the problem? Any problem. So whatever you got going on in your business, am I, studying that problem deeply enough to understand what it will take to solve it? And am I asking enough questions around it? So we've got leads. Are they not converting? Do we have the right leads? Are we asking the right questions of those leads? Is it the buyer's journey that's the problem? There's 1,000 questions I could ask, right? Once you start to ask those questions and understand narrowing down what the actual fundamental problem is, most of the time it's creativity. So we get, in particular in tech and sales in general, we get a little stuck in our ways, a little bit process driven. I always thought of it as like art and science, and it's a blend of the two, and it's never balanced. Sometimes you need to employ more science and get really deep in the data and look at the rates and look at trends and make a decision on that. One of the things we do here at Newbie Revenue for our customers is like we'll look at trend over time and then inflection points in your business. I'm drawing in the air, sorry, but inflection points in your business. So we say like, cool, I'm going to make it up, but like you had 20,000 leads, Q1 on average, Q2 you dropped to 15, Q3 you dropped to 10, Q4 you went back up to 25,000. What happened in Q3? Market, industry, business, and be very specific in that. So we know actually it was the market. We had the start of the pandemic, big, thing to point to, or we had Elon Musk, tweeting something stupid and it totally tanked the whatever market, right?
Or
like,
it's the Olympics.
All those things. Yeah. Like there's all of these different moments. Do we need to point to a bad data, a bad customer, or a bad moment in the world and what was driving it? Right now, how do you improve it? You need to be a student of that. You got to look at what's happened. I think in many ways, month over month and quarter over quarter, you can't say year over year anymore because so much changes over the course of a year. It starts to become sort of irrelevant. And then really hone in on your factors and track them. So it can't just be, did we convert enough or generate enough? But what are the layer 2 and layer 3 metrics within that? So look at, like I love to talk about with my sales team, what is your like number of deals is a famous thing. Everyone talks about how many deals did you work last month or create or whatever your value is. I look at quality. So I look at total revenue per opportunity. And I look at, does that revenue maintain? So like, does a SDR generate through an inbound lead, for example's sake, right? A QL that converts into a deal that moves through a deal process. It starts at 50 grand and grows to 150 grand, or does it end at $25,000? And what's happening there? And so there's all these kind of layers to it. Once you study that and understand it, then, and I got to give credit to Mark Roberge, the original CRO at HubSpot. He was always good at this. And actually, I've learned from other sales leaders in my professional career, but you got to pick one thing. You can't change everything. And in a world where everything is telling us to change constantly, social media, AI, advertising and whatnot, my advice would be pick something today. What are we in? We're in August. So you've got like the rest of August, you've got September, you've got October. I would let whatever that thing is you change operate for that timeline. Call it 8 to 10 weeks. Now you got 8 to 10 weeks of the data. Did it work? If it didn't, experiment number 2. Go through the last couple months of the year through January, and I'm overlapping quarters intentionally because everyone loves to benchmark Q4. Oh, it's the biggest one ever. Well, that's not a really good representation of data then. Come on. Let's overlap into Q1 with January and decide, do we maintain that average? Do we increase that average or whatever? Stay a student, reflect on it often, like every 2 weeks, watch the trend and make micro adjustments. Stop like with the big swing stuff because it doesn't work. It's just too much change for your company to actually maintain.
I mean, as an engineer, by training many, many years ago, it was kind of like engineering 101. If a system's broken or it's not working to its optimum level rather than not working at all, you change something and then you look at the impact because it's a multivariable system. So you hold everything else constant, you change one thing, you look at the impact. Then you go, well, I'll change something else. And then you look at what the difference is between different levers and then work out how you optimize.
It's a scientific method. You got to form a hypothesis, you got to run your experiments, you got to document, you got to decide if you've proven or disproven your hypothesis, and then you need to decide if you run another experiment. I think those experiments have to be long and intentional, and that's hard in today's market, but I think that's how you start to actually change your conversion metrics versus knee-jerk reaction. Our sales process sucks, or our sales team needs this, or our CS team needs that. It just doesn't actually get you the output that you're looking for.
It doesn't. And it's symptom versus root cause. Always go to the root cause. always go to
my
the
leg
root cause.
hurts. Great. Here's some drugs. My leg hurts. Great. Cut it off. Actually, your shoes just suck. You need some new shoes, right?
Exactly.
Like it's a simple solution.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Barrett, this has been amazing.
It has.
Just reflect just for a minute and just kind of sum up. If you, if someone in the audience is like maybe $1 million of revenue, they're a services company, they're growing, but growth is really tough in this market, and they're looking for what are the kind of couple of things they should walk away and think about when they're looking at growing profitable revenue incrementally, without trying to be a firecracker. What should they do? A couple of things.
Got to go look at why your customers are buying and why those customers are sticking around. I would start there, honestly, right now. That is the most important vital metric, because let's just assume that tomorrow everything stops again and you keep your customers for the next 12 months. You're still okay, right? You don't grow, but you're okay. I would start there, examine my customers. Why are customers successful? Who am I happiest? I would interview them, ask for gaps, start to look at what we're not delivering on, and not assume that that's a me problem, but it's a ecosystem problem. So this is kind of my point too. There are things you're not going to do well, things that you are not going to develop or lean into, invest in. Those are your partnership opportunities. Is that integrations? Is that go-to-market partnerships? Is that, a variety of things? But start to look at your ecosystem as lever two and understand where your gaps and your opportunities are and find businesses that are already fulfilling those and go and partner with them. Whether it is a rev share or just a collaborative thing, go and figure that out as step two. And the step three, I think, is probably the hardest, which is like, slow down a little bit. I don't know how else to explain it other than that. We are starting to be programmed to move faster than we are humanly meant to, like as functional organisms. And I think it's really easy to do that. So being a student of the problem will help you do so. And then sort of my last point, which is like, slow down, study the problem more deeply, phone a friend, ask somebody, go ask some questions of the internet, of your peers, go to LinkedIn, shoot me a note. Like I'm on LinkedIn, that's where I'm most active. Shoot me a note there. If you're listening to this, in August of 2024, New Breed Revenue can probably solve it for you. So shoot me a note over there as well. If it's 5 years from now, maybe I'm here, maybe I'm not, but you can always find me on LinkedIn. And I think asking your peers, being vulnerable, being intentional, and learning is my kind of asterisk on top. We didn't talk a lot about that, but student of the problem is my third point. And then the bigger picture here is like learning with intent to understand.
Definitely. Just the catchphrase, being a student of the problem. To me, that sums up an awful lot of things about life, not just about business and sales.
It does, for sure. Yeah.
So Barrett, it's been amazing. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. And where can people find out more about you? LinkedIn, basically.
Yep. Let's go to LinkedIn. Thanks for having me. It's been fun to talk about it. I do try and be active on LinkedIn. I've slowed down the last couple of months, a lot going on, but I want to get back to it. I'm always happy to have a chat though. I have this sort of rule of I'll spend 15 minutes with anybody, and if I can help, I'll try and spend more time.
Brilliant. Barrett, thank you ever so much indeed.
Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.